So, gang, welcome back for another week of Ranching Reboot. This week, Jared Lehman, host of the Herd Quitter podcast, joins me on Zoom. Jared, welcome to Ranching Reboot. How are you today?
Hey, Brian. Thanks. I'm doing well. I am happy to be in the house. It got a little colder today after it was being 45 degrees yesterday. So I'm enjoying a day in the office, which is nice because it dropped back down to mid-teens, I think. So
just before I sat down to do this, I went outside and I walked around a little bit, just to keep blood moving because, we're going to be sitting here for a little while.
Yeah.
And it's 72 degrees. There's just a nice breeze. The sun is out. Birds are singing. It's a beautiful day. In 24 hours, it's going to be 50 degrees cooler.
Wow. 50 degrees cooler. Okay. That's a bit of a drop. I think we're looking at 20 or 30 degrees warmer or cooler than it was yesterday, but that's enough. I mean, it's right at this time of year where it's like you can start to point towards spring, but you're not quite gonna get too excited when it warms up a little bit because there's still a long time that could definitely get pretty nasty. So right. I'm not getting my hopes up too much when we had a 44-degree day yesterday, but it was just it felt like spring and it was pretty nice.
Well, down here in southern Kansas, generally we get to the end of February, and that's the last of your cold weather. And it looks like, according to the National Weather Service, we got about 90 hours of cold coming up, like of below freezing, which that's tolerable. We can deal with that. But hopefully that should be the last cold blast we've got to deal with. And as we get through March, we'll get a couple wild storms first part of March. Then somewhere around there, I'll release this episode, and hopefully we'll just get some good rains and carry through.
Yeah. So this may be a dumb question I should maybe know. So if you're kind of March is already where it starts to get bad, when do things start greening up? When do people start planting things like in your area?
Well, I'm not much of a farmer, so I'm kind of the terrible guy to ask. We've already been starting a bunch of our seeds indoors, like for early cool season crop, early cool season garden crops, things like that, like onions, broccolis, things of that nature. But as far as the farmers around here, just north of me, there's a lot of irrigation, and they're gonna probably first 2 weeks of April, or whenever the almanac tells them the last freeze gone, they're gonna go out and they're gonna start putting the corns and the beans in the dirt. Wheat harvest, it's planted in the fall here, grows all winter, generally harvested early June, late May is about when grain harvest starts down here. Every once in a while, you get a couple of weirdos do some double crop milo. Sometimes that fits in, and cotton start to be big and feed's starting to be big, but that's all, growing season stuff.
Sure. Yeah. And your grass is mostly green, or warm season grasses, right? So that probably is later in the season when it really starts going, or
warm season grass is really going to make up the bulk of my pastures. But I need the cool season grasses, and I need the forbs to provide, a lot of that nutritional punch that the warm season grasses can't always provide. Everything is great to eat in the pasture for a couple of days, right?
Yeah.
Everything just demands to be eaten for a very short window. And, finding those pastures that have a lot of that stuff and making sure the cows are there when that stuff should be palatable. Sometimes it can be a challenge, but
sure. Yeah.
That wasn't your question. So
no, it's interesting. When we talk about weather, it blows my mind that you were 70 degrees here today, but I forget, totally different worlds. So
it's 30 when I left the house, and I was in a hoodie. And by the time I got done checking water and checking cows and, just checking on everything, it was 68 or 9. And I was about ready to shed the hoodie and turn the air conditioner on.
Yeah. That's always cool. I love in the spring when you get outside and it's like, it's weird. In the spring, when it's 65 degrees, you feel like you could be in shorts and a t-shirt. Fall, when it gets to 65 degrees, it's like bundled up in a
where's my snowsuit,
bibs, and exactly. Yeah.
So where are you?
Yeah, I'm located in southeast Minnesota. So the town is Goodhue, and it's right in between the Twin Cities and Rochester, which nobody ever knows where Goodhue is. And if they've heard of Goodhue, it's also in Goodhue County. So they always ask, where in Goodhue are you? I'm like, Goodhue. And they're like, yeah, but where? So yeah, Goodhue Town, Goodhue Township, Goodhue Town, Goodhue County, southeast Minnesota.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've never visited Minnesota. The closest I've been would have been probably 25 years ago. No, it was over 25 years ago. I went up to see some family when they had a place in Door County, Wisconsin. And
Okay.
I would imagine that it's 100% not like that where you are.
Yeah, it's probably a little different than Wisconsin. They've got little different terrains. We're in a, like kind of just rolling hills, pretty darn productive ground. It's mostly crop country around me. Everything, if I look out, is almost entirely corn and soybeans. And if there's something green, it's alfalfa, and it's fed to dairy cows, kind of just alfalfa hay. But yeah, not many people do get up here, and the invitation is open to you. But I always invite people, say, if you're ever in Minnesota, swing by. But nobody's ever in Minnesota. If they are, they're at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, and they're not in a visiting mood. So
It's kind of like here. I always invite people. Yeah, if you're ever in a neighborhood, come by and see me. The trouble is, my neighborhood is so far off the beaten track. The only way to get here is if you're actually going here. Like, not many people actually just accidentally happen to be passing by.
Yeah. No, that's the way it is here. But I don't know. One of these days, somebody will be like, I happen to go into Minnesota, and I'll be like blown away. But it's not really a destination. And I shouldn't say that, because there are some beautiful places in Minnesota, and especially when you get up north, you got the Boundary Waters. And I've never actually been there myself. Some of the more unique things in Minnesota, I haven't strayed too far from home for the most part. So, but would like to, for sure.
I can appreciate that. There's a lot of cool things in Kansas I haven't had the opportunity to see.
Yeah.
Someday we'll get out, we'll get around, but we'll get there.
For sure.
So tell me about Jared. Did you grow up there in Southeast Minnesota?
Yeah. So right now I'm sitting in my office. That's the home farm that my grandpa had purchased in the 90s. And if it's kind of hard to describe, I guess, here, but the house I grew up in was about just up the road, and there's kind of a diagonal line about a half a mile apiece where I grew up in that house. My dad grew up in the house I'm in now. You go a half a mile straight southwest is the house my grandpa grew up in, and another house just down the way is the house his father grew up in. So the Lumans have been here for, I don't even know how long. We're bad at some of that family history stuff, but we've been here for well over a century. And my brother's family, or my grandpa's brother's family, runs the original homestead, the Century Farm, and we're on the farm my grandpa bought in the 1960s. And yeah, I guess I've always grown up in this area, but and we can get into it whenever later or something too. But my dad actually started a grazing dairy about 3 or 4 miles down the road, and I grew up there till I was 8 years old, and then we moved back here to the home farm in the year 2000 or so. What's that?
Is he still doing the grazing dairy?
No. So he did that when he got home from school. There wasn't really room to come home to the home farm, and it's kind of how we got into grazing was, and I guess we'll go way back. My grandfather and his brother farmed together, and they were, for the time, in like the 60s, 70s, 80s, pretty progressive farmers. In like the 70s, they were milking close to 200 beef dairy cows, had like 100 to 150 beef cows, and a few hundred sheep, and they were farming like 1,000 acres, which is pretty big in this area, but it's very much conventional commodity agriculture. And we had a lot of foreign exchange student labor to keep all those operations going. And a guy, Ed Bazette, who was from New Zealand, was one of our foreign exchange students, and wasn't afraid to tell my grandpa. He said, "You guys are 15 years behind everything we're doing over there in New Zealand. You got it all wrong. What are you doing? You're working so hard. What is," just kind of told him how it was. And my grandpa, was smart enough to not take offense to that, but say maybe there's something to this, and kind of encouraged my dad to go over to New Zealand and figure out what he was talking about. And so my dad went over to New Zealand and spent 8 months or so there working on a grazing dairy, and then a beef, sheep, and deer station, actually. And so then he came back, and my grandpa wasn't, there wasn't really room on the home farm. They had actually, in the late 80s, split my grandpa and his brother, so they weren't dairying anymore, and my grandpa was just kind of conventional beef and crops. And so my dad bought this dairy down the road, started his own grazing dairy, and then in year 2000, my grandpa was ready to kind of back out of the management of the farm, and so dad sold the dairy and moved back to the home farm. So kind of a roundabout way of answering your question. Does he still dairy? No, he doesn't. He doesn't.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So back to
Yeah.
your story.
Yeah.
Your house you grew up in. Like, I'm living in the house that I was conceived in, basically.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. So I grew up there 3 miles down the road at the dairy. The time when we sold that, I remember bouncing in the back of the 5-wheeler up and down this rocky hill and bringing cattle down and watching Dad kind of do a little bit of grazing management and stuff there. I didn't really know what was happening, but he moved to the home farm here when I was then 8, and it's literally the house right up the road. It's a quarter mile up the road from the farm driveway, which is where I live now. I live where my grandpa lived, and so I grew up there. I had 2 brothers. Neither of them really ever showed much interest in the farm. One would help when we needed it, but no more. The other would help a little more often when Dad asked, but wasn't really interested. And then myself, I always loved the farm. Although it's kind of funny, growing up, I hated the cattle and hated the livestock. In the early 2000s, Dad actually jumped into sheep and got a few hundred ewes, and hated the sheep, hated the beef cattle. I just wanted to sit in a tractor and drive. I wanted to make hay. I loved haying, loved crop farming, that stuff. And that's what I thought I would do, but I knew we were never really big enough to make a living doing conventional cropping. And cattle was a big part. And so we raised organic crops, and cattle was a big part of that. And the rotation. And so I bought some cows of my own, and in the process of buying and managing some of my own cows, I kind of fell in love with the cattle side of it.
So how were the cows part of the organic farming operation?
Yeah. So with organic crops, I mean, there's a few main challenges. One is weed pressure. We have a lot of moisture, and every new rainfall, you get a new flush of weeds and a lot of weed pressure here. And so to kind of part of the way of helping control weeds is to break up years out of crop production into some sort of a forage, either a hay or a pasture mix, and that kind of just sets back and kind of delays. It kind of just seems to set back weed pressure and stuff. So we would rotate corn, beans, and then into some sort of a perennial for 2 to 4 years, and then kind of back into crops. And so cattle gave us some sort of a way to generate income off of those off crop years. And the other big challenge, in addition to weed control, is fertility. And right. So by having livestock on the farm, you can have access to manure and kind of utilize some of that. Although we did still import some extra manure and stuff too, but that was the big part was that rotation, getting it out of crop production for a couple of years at a time.
Importing manure is probably a smarter idea than importing liquid nitrogen.
Yeah.
And you're touching on something that, it's pretty important to not overlook, is what cattle can provide in terms of fertility for the big 3 nutrients: nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, and even carbon, just by having their presence out on the landscape. My friend Macaulay Kincaid helped me with some numbers a couple of years ago. I went through and grabbed a couple different dairy studies from land-grant universities about what manure, how it broke down, like nitrogen, carbon, potassium, and what was what, and what fertility effect that had when it was applied on a field. Now, granted, they were kind of taking, your typical dairy situation where you've got a big liquid pit where everything goes, which we could both agree that's not how things work in the real world. But I think some of the math carries over as far as the actual volumes of NPK and carbon that are getting transported back out. So the calculations that I came to, if you had a paddock stocked at approximately 50,000 pounds per acre of cows for 24 hours, you're going to add about $50 worth of synthetic fertility to that pasture. Now, granted, these are all pre-COVID costs. These numbers are 2-3 years old, so they're kind of basically pre-COVID.
Yeah,
you can imagine how all.
So that's totaling up the value. So you were calculating the total NP and K that you got out of the manure that those cattle deposited and equating it to a value based on chemical, kind of synthetic fertilizers. Is what you're saying you were doing?
Right. Yeah. It's just okay. This much NPK and carbon from the cows.
Yeah.
what would it cost to bring the equivalent
Yeah.
quantity of synthetic fertilizer and apply it? And the cost
Hmm.
was, I mean, it was 50 plus
Yeah. Wow.
acre.
No,
So
that's cool. Yeah.
yeah, the fertility is definitely worth something.
Yeah. Yeah. And for sure we saw that. I mean, and like, yeah, it was neat because I remember one year in particular, we had this field that was just up the way and it had been in pasture for, I don't know, 8 years, 10 years, significantly longer than the average rotation. And it was when we put it back into crops, which now I talk about this and it makes me sad to think of taking this 8 or 10 year established pasture and tilling it up and putting it back into crops. So it's hard to even think about that, but we did. And it was the highest yielding field. We had a custom combiner come out and said, this should be on the cover of Organic Magazine or whatever. He said, he was weed free, extremely high yield and stuff. And so you're right. It was neat to see that, like that, the impact that grazing for many years can have on productivity. You know, it not that you now, like I say, it makes me sad to think about just tearing it all up and wasting that just to go back and get some good yielding corn. So, but it was cool to see.
But it was informational and educational. I mean, you learned something.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And you know, I mean, it's kind of a challenge in our area, the land. I grew up being told you need to farm, you need 1,000 acres per full-time family member to farm here. And now we're running like 700 acres. You know, back then we were 500 acres or so. And we had myself and my dad, and for a while there, my grandpa as well, you know, 2 to 3 generations farming and running, you know, trying to make a living off of this farm. And so, you know, organic crops has always been a big part of our, you know, our business's financial viability, because organic crop production is quite lucrative.
Premium.
It can
Sure.
generate, yeah, it's a premium product and it generates a pretty good premium or profit per acre. And so, you know, that's been a big part of our farm story and getting us to where we are today and stuff. So, you know, we look back at it, you know, as we've learned more about, and we still do some, we've been moving more and more towards pasture, but we still do some, but looking back at it as we learn more and more about soil health, and we're not sure how much progress we made, if any, at the soil. And we were doing it as best as we could as far as organic cropping, trying to build soils. We were doing it as best we could, but it's still, we're not sure how much progress we made, but it was a big part of our financial, you know, kind of thing. And in the holistic context anyway, when we're considering soil health and financial viability and lifestyle, it was a big part of that financial kind of piece. And
I would argue you were improving the soil health. It, and maybe, oh gosh, I just painted myself into a corner.
yeah,
But you proved by an experiment, by an extractive experiment of corn, that the high density grazing and establishing a perennial pasture and then breaking it back out for a crop, you've proved that that works. You
Yeah.
prove that it's a low cost way to add fertility. It's a way to get a really great crop. It just requires more creativity and more management. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good point. Like, I don't know if we did a huge amount of destruction or anything and stuff, but I do think, you know, the way we managed it did definitely probably make some improvements too. And I had a conversation with Lance Gunderson. He's
I love
the,
that
so
guy.
yeah. He's in Nebraska there. What is Regen Ag Labs, something like that.
Regen Ag Lab. Yeah.
Yeah.
Link in
And
the
he was
show
kind of
notes.
talking about the destruction or the destructivity, what I don't even know what the word is, the destructiveness of tillage. And he kind of talked about, you know, yeah, it's not great. And if you can avoid it, great. That's fantastic. But when you really think about the ability of biology and a healthy functioning system to recover from tillage, it can do it pretty quickly, he talked about. And so we wanted to minimize tillage as much as possible. And there's guys doing it where there's very little tillage, and we probably did it more than we should, and we hadn't figured it out as well as some folks do. But even if you have to, for weed control or something, use a little bit of tillage occasionally, he wasn't too worried. He thought that might be better than, for example, a no-till heavy chemical and synthetic system that, you know, it's I don't know, in a world where it's pretty tough to have perfection. I mean, in an ideal world, it's a perennial pasture mix and grazing and stuff. But the challenge with that up here is winter. We can't graze year round, and that gets really expensive to feed cattle through the winter. So there's
You can't
not
even
much
stockpile forage into pasture for them.
We can, and we have. We the most years the issue is that the snow falls and it kind of, we have a couple warm days and then it freezes and it kind of ices over.
That's not ideal for cows trying to find groceries.
It's not. Yeah, it's not. It's been a struggle. We've for the last kind of 6 or 7 years now since I got more involved and got home on the farm and stuff. We've been really trying to figure out how do we graze later. Dad and I went and did the numbers on what it actually cost us to feed hay, and I'm like embarrassed almost to say this, like what our costs were, because it was so not sustainable. Like
you don't have to say
didn't even do it.
You don't have to say it. It's
well,
fine.
I mean, it was just a not sustainable price that we were paying especially when you include opportunity costs. We were feeding what was really good, high quality organic alfalfa hay that we could have sold to an organic dairy for $250 a ton to beef cows and feed, so I mean, it worked out to several dollars per day. And we're like, well, gosh, we just need to reduce our winter feed costs. We need to do this. And so we started with a lot of sorghum sedan plantings is the big kind of thing we did. And even that got buried under snow and ice, where if we grazed it August, September, November, even in December, we were getting 180 plus cow days per acre out of the sorghum. And when it got buried under snow in February, we were getting 30 cow days per acre, and the rest they couldn't access, and they were going backwards in body condition pretty quick. And so when you have $200 to $300 an acre land rent tied up in something that gets you 30 cow days per acre, it just that's pretty expensive too. And so for winter, we've kind of actually gone to a couple things. Grazing corn stalks is the main one, and we send our cows are actually down in southeast Nebraska grazing corn stalks down there, and our yearlings are grazing. They've grazed corn stalks 10 miles away. And the last 3 years, we've gotten till January 20th or later grazing corn stalks up here. So I don't know if that's consistent. That's 3 years in a row of trials that we've been able to get that late, but it's way better than most folks starting to feed in end of October.
Are you still, so when they're out on stalks, you're still having to feed, right?
No, they're just grazing straight stalks. No hay, no protein, nothing. They just salt and mineral grazing stalks through snow and ice as deep as as long as they can. And yeah, that's that. It's the best we can do to push them hard. Yeah, we've been trying to breed the tough ones. So
breed the tough ones. So we'll circle back to that. I still haven't finished hearing the story of how Jared came to the farm.
Sure.
To the ranch.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, so as a kid, I was always the one that wanted to help on the farm, for sure. Spent most every day after school and all summer out working. My brothers had off-farm jobs, and I think it was probably a blessing for some reason. When I got my driver's license, even though there was plenty of work to do on the farm, I applied at 11 different places and not one called me back. So I don't know. I have a feeling my dad called them all and said, you better not hire my son because I need him here or something. But I didn't get a job, and I ended up just working on the farm, and then went to school at the University of Minnesota. In the summers, I had summer internships, but close to home, so I could farm, and weekends, and I would come home and farm from school and stuff. So I was always pretty involved, but graduated and came right home. Just when I graduated, came right back, which I still am not sure if that was the best thing or not. My dad had that opportunity to go to New Zealand, and I was wondered if I maybe missed out on that opportunity. And so actually in 2020, when we kind of were deciding to more actively switch out of cropping towards more pasture, we realized it really doesn't take any more labor to move 250 cows than it did 150 cows. And we have a lot less cropping to do, and Dad wasn't going to leave. So I actually took a job working for the Sustainable Farming Association as well. So I still farm after work and weekends and stuff, but that's been kind of my New Zealand trip. It's been a fantastic opportunity to go out and meet farmers all around the state and learn how other people are doing things. And yeah, that's been good. But went to school and came right home after I graduated.
Nobody's going to judge you for sitting in in a tractor. Nobody's
Yeah.
gonna judge you for farming.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, well, it's not even that it's bad. We both prefer cattle now. It's weird because like I said, growing up, I loved sitting in the tractor, listening to the radio. Now it bores me to death. Like all I want to do is be out moving cattle and, out in the cattle or out in the pasture with cows and stuff. That's what we both enjoy. Neither of us are mechanical. And probably part of the thing that changed when I came home. It was nice when I was in high school. If something broke down, I'd be like, hey dad, call him up, hey dad, tractor broke. I'm going to head into town with the guys. Let me know when it's ready and I'll come back and plant or whatever, and today, hey dad, something broke. He's like, all right, well, I'm overdoing this. You better figure it out. Let me know when you got it fixed or something. It's like,
Wait till those calls go the other
changed.
way, and it's dad being like, "Oh, hey, this broke. I don't know what happened. I'm gonna get to the house. Good luck."
That's happened as well. Yep, no doubt.
Yeah, get used to
it. Yeah. No, I have no problem with farmers by no means. I'm surrounded by almost all of my friends here are regular crop farmers. I think there's even ways to really build soil in crop farming. I've seen people do amazing things with cover crops and just corn and soybeans, but adding cover crops and no-till in the right ways. It's tremendous what people can do. So I have nothing against farming. I just realized that's not really what I want to do.
Yeah, and that kind of brings to mind a lot of the things that I say on this podcast and that some of my guests talk about make it sound like we're really negative on commodity crop farming. Well, we kind of are, but there's still a place for it. I mean, the soils that are just north of me, where it gets into irrigated country that goes through most of Kansas and up into Nebraska and west into Colorado, down through the panhandles, there is so much potential to heal so many acres of soil that have been degraded by this monoculture agriculture. It's like, there's a lot of programs, government programs, and like the one I'm thinking of is the lesser prairie chicken habitat conservation. And there's a bunch of wind farms north of me. They had to build a bunch of big power lines to get the power out. And this is 14 years ago. The guy was coming out to site the power lines, and he's like, well, we don't want to put them through the farm ground because that's going to interrupt the farmers. And that'll be in the way of the wind turbines. We want to put them out here through this place. And we're like, well, hold up. This is critical prairie chicken habitat. It's like some of the last.
Yeah.
And we got him to agree, like, to designate it as a listed bird. That's since come off. But the good part was they moved the power line. I mean, it's not on the ranch. I could still see it from the house. I could see it from the ranch. But the whole ridge north of me, and I can see probably 40 miles of it stretching across the horizon. It's just wind turbines.
Wow.
100% wind turbines. And we don't have any down here. And I'm kind of grateful for it because and where I was leading to with that is we have this wonderful bird, the lesser prairie chicken. And it's really an amazing bird. I mean, native prairie grouse to this part of the world. And we've pushed it into this marginal, in this incredibly marginal habitat. I mean, I'll admit that right now. My ranch is and always has been marginal habitat for that bird. The big flat open farm, the big open areas that are up north of me that are currently under, either a 2 or 3 crop oscillation or rotation, or growing the most soil destructive crop that can be possibly planted here. That's where all the prime prairie chicken habitat is. That's where all the prime grazing land is.
Why is your habitat not prairie chicken habitat, but up there it's like, what's the difference in?
They like big flat open spaces where they can see forever. They don't like the canyons and the brush where the coyotes can sneak up on them.
Sure. Okay.
They like to have a big open area that's kind of grazed a little bit flat to do their mating dance called booming. It's pretty cool. Like Native American tribes have prairie chicken dance that's modeled after the actual prairie chicken dance. So that's pretty neat.
That is neat.
But then they also need some tallish cover nearby. And they need they need a varied amount of habitat. Like you see in the picture behind me, the grass is up to my cows' bellies. That's
Yeah.
good nesting habitat, but it's not always good feeding or breeding habitat. So you have to have kind of a good,
Sure.
you have to have the right
Okay.
mix of habitat, is what I'm saying.
That makes sense. Because that's when I see what's behind you. Like, obviously, nobody listening can see what's behind you. That I imagine when I see that, it looks like beautiful, some sort of bird habitat, kind of cover from wildlife protection and stuff. That's what I would imagine. But I've never been, a wildlife expert by any means. So,
I, I guess I'm not a wildlife expert in the sense that I just observe wildlife constantly when I'm out on the ranch, and occasionally I visit with a couple people that are a lot smarter than me.
yeah.
But we're speaking of what's going on in the video. If you want to see the video and what we're actually talking about in our backgrounds, you're gonna have to go to my Patreon and sign up for Patreon to get the unedited versions of the videos. So
I didn't know we were on video. That's good to know. I didn't I would have I don't know, worn a nicer shirt or something.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. They
Yeah.
come here for the content, not how pretty I am.
That's
For
good.
sure. And if they came
That's
here for
good.
how pretty I am, I would have zero fans. I
It's
promise.
that beard. That's what they're coming to see.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Okay, so circling back, you're back on the farm. About what year was that you came back to the farm? You said just a couple
That
years.
was spring of 2015. I got back. I graduated college. Yep. Spring of 2015.
Okay. So what the operation look like then versus what it looks like now?
Yeah. So at that time, we had just picked up another farm. We were running about 600 acres and probably 250 to 350, somewhere in there, acres of row crops a year, or probably 250 to 300 acres of row crops a year of organic corn, sweet corn, field corn, sweet corn, black edible beans, and soybeans. Are the main crops that we raise and stuff. And the rest was either alfalfa, hay, kind of in a rotation, or perennial pastures. We had really just two farms that we could graze on. One was the home farm, and a farm that we'd picked up in 2014 that we had just put fence around. And the other farms, we rented two other farms that they didn't have fence, didn't have water infrastructure, nothing like that. And so, yeah, the cropping was a big part of it. And we were still kind of, at that time, had really no intentions of changing out of the cropping system. It was a big part of it. But within a couple of years, actually that fall of 2015 that I graduated, my grandpa he was still, up until that point, every day, sun up till sundown, out there working. And so we had three of us, and the workload was high, and we had enough people. And up until, and then that fall of 2015, my grandpa had a stroke, and he moved into town to an assisted living home and stuff. And at that point, that fall and the following summer, it was exhausting. Just dad and me doing all this, and we were working like crazy. And that's the way my grandpa and my dad had grown up, and I had grown up that way too. And I knew that, but I also knew that I didn't want that to be my life either. And so we kind of realized we wanted something to change lifestyle wise, in addition to the soil health. And when I got home, I went to everything that I could get to as far as conferences and conventions and things to learn. And so soil health was something I was learning a lot about, and just seemed to make sense that we needed to change something.
Who's your favorite soil health guru?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. Looking over at my bookshelf for help. Dirt to Soil was always my favorite book. Gabe Brown, my favorite book, until I read the Turnaround, actually, by Dave Pratt, the book they send out with the school that shall not be named, I believe is what you refer to it as. But
you're not even gonna let me hit the button. I was ready.
Oh yeah. Well, I apologize for that. You got a beeper or something like that, or a ding, a bell?
Yeah, for
the Ranching for Profit school.
There we go.
Nice. That's great. That book is now my new favorite. But the Gabe Brown's book and what he's done in his ranch in North Dakota is so cool. And it always, while it's a totally different environment, it was cool in that it was both crops and livestock. It wasn't just a grazing story, and it wasn't just a cropping story. It was similar to our story, and that it had both, and that he used them, integrated them. So that was kind of relevant and spoke to me, I guess, more than some stories, of people who are all one, and that's just not our context. But no, he was a big one, for sure, for sure. Yeah, and Jason Roundtree, actually, that fall, my mom's family is from Michigan, and so my dad sent me. He told me the Grass-Fed Exchange is having a conference out in Michigan at Michigan State University, and so I went out there and stayed with my grandpa out there, and went to the Grass-Fed Exchange that Jason Roundtree in Michigan State was hosting. And I've always thought what they're doing is it's probably the closest to our environment as far as high moisture, high snowfall, productive grounds, but trying to run a low input grazing system. So they were also people that I kind of looked up to as far as kind of pioneers in this world of trying to make grass work on productive grass or productive lands and stuff in a northern wet environment.
Are you going to go to Grass-Fed Exchange this year? I think it's down in Fort Worth.
It's in May, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like the third.
It seems to me like it seems like a ridiculous time to plan a grazing conference like that. I mean, no, I'm not going to make it.
I'm going to try to be there. The young man I had working with me last summer will be finishing his first year at college and be starting summer break about 10 days before I got to leave.
Okay.
That. So I'll have.
Are you calving in? Is that when? Are you calving in May? When do you calve? I guess.
I should start in 2 weeks, and I've been saying for about 3 weeks. But 1st of May, like I think around the 4th or 6th of May is when I should have my first calf.
March or May?
March. Did I say May?
You said May, but you also said 2 or 3 weeks, so I was confused.
Yeah, we're supposed to start at the beginning of March, like sometime between the 4th and the 6th, I think, by the calendar. But I think we both know that Mother Nature and genetics can play their own tricks. So I'm expecting a couple early ones.
Yeah.
Literally today, because the cold is coming. So I will be shocked if I make it through this cold snap and don't have some early calves.
Okay. So May for like that conference, then May won't be too bad. Most of your calves should be on the ground and things should be in a little bit more of a routine, or
things never stop being on a routine. We calve on the move.
Yeah.
See, I'm that weirdo. I run everything in one big beautiful mess. Okay.
I love that.
In the picture behind me, you'll see everything from a 16-year-old longhorn cow over, where'd she go? Now she's hiding. 14 or 16-year-old longhorn cow. Like her horns are way too wide to even get down my alley, much less preg check. As cheap as water, she looks cool. She's here. But I've got everything from her down to 1-year-olds. All running in the same big, beautiful mess. Got last year's calves, 2 years ago's calves, and every cow that I've bought running in one big, beautiful mess. There's 3 steers out there. There's 2 calves one steer calf at each generation. And then I've got Big Steve. He's my big longhorn. I mean, if you don't have a longhorn for pasture, are you really a rancher?
We are not. Then
That's okay. I didn't mean that.
No, I love it. That's awesome. I think that's so cool.
So things just stay on a big beautiful mess, and I don't stop rotating when I start calving.
Okay.
So we're not going very far. Like, we're going across the fence line. And a lot of times, that's being out there paying attention to behavior. Like, if you get them up and you're moving them all slow and you're paying attention and making sure they get paired, and you've got good maternal cattle that aren't running off and leaving their calves, and just let them go at their pace, it works great. But if you try to move them with the feed truck, that's when they just run off and leave their calf.
Sure.
And you suck them through a gate, you put them in another pasture, you feed them, and then, they get done with this, massive sugar high that they've been on because you fed them. And then they go like, oh crap, where's my calf?
Yeah.
So having the cattle content and paired up and moving them at their own pace. Been calving on the move for years, and it's never been an issue.
How often do you move them? Is it the same as when you're calving as when you're not then?
Right now we're like every 5 to 7 days or so.
Okay.
Because I'm lightly stocked and we're in big paddocks. Just trying to make sure we've got plenty of rest going back in. We're going to stock back up around the 1st of May to 1st of June, just depending on what part of the ranch we're stocking. We're going to stock back up a little bit, but not get too aggressive, because I'm staring down the double barrel shotgun of like a record drought that's just been spreading away for 2 years. So I've been planning for it, and I think I'm ready.
Okay. that I could ask you a million questions. I'm fascinated by your environment and everything and stuff. So I would like to do that. Yeah.
Well, I want to hear about your cows.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I can tell you about them. Our cows have changed from when my grandpa was running the farm. He had the old like the white-faced Simmentals, like the big ones, tall ones and stuff like that. And he kind of saw that
The
that
ones that
wasn't
made
really the
everybody want to buy
direction.
low birth weight bulls.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And my grandpa, he was a progressive guy, kind of, at the time when he was early and stuff. He was running, acres and farm that was very advanced and stuff. And he saw that Simmental market with the type of cattle he had wasn't really the direction that made a lot of sense. And everybody and their brother was selling registered Angus and stuff. So he went with red Angus, which turned out to be kind of a good decision for us. So we're 100% registered red Angus cattle. Is the breed we're running. And my dad, when he kind of took over, really after that New Zealand experience, was a grass-based kind of a guy, and so he wasn't really interested in the big type of cattle, and he was breeding for kind of a more grass-based type animal himself. And we'd always been, even back into the Simmentals, selling a few head off the farm kind of in bulls as seed stock. Grandpa would always sell a few bulls, and dad sold a few bulls and stuff too. And so we've been raising red Angus for over 20 years, 20, 25, 30 years. And for at least the last 20 to 25 now or so, it's been grass-based genetics and kind of breeding for that as long as dad's been around. Yeah.
Well, you made a remark about breeding the tough ones.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So, and we raise cattle for Faro Cattle Company, is kind of who we raise bulls for and stuff. And he's kind of who we really got that out of. I mean, it's all about low input, and up here, up here, the summer forages are pretty high quality. I mean, we've got good lush green grass year round and stuff like that. And so it's kind of almost a challenge to breed tough cattle, especially if you feed all winter long,
Right.
Because they're getting good grass all summer and good, feed all winter and stuff. And that's what we had been doing for a while. And so really we want cattle that can survive on what our environment produces. We don't want to baby them. We don't want to stick money into them, and we want to see the cattle that survive. And we have a no excuses policy, where if they don't get bred back, if they have an issue and they come up open, even if they were our favorite cow the year before, they're gone. And I always like what Kid had said about you might get rid of a couple good cows that way, but you'll for sure get rid of every single bad cow. And so that's kind of been our philosophy, is just pull out the inputs, pull out the supplements, and kind of the toughest way we found to raise our cattle now has been like kind of corn stalks. I don't know how we can't kind of evaluating our environment. What do we have an abundance of? We have a lot of corn production around here. The problem is most people want to turn it black before the ground freezes. But we found one individual who is a no-tiller and saw the advantage of having livestock on their farm. And so we've been working with him now for the last 4 or 5 years and grazing animals out on his corn stalks and getting, like I mentioned, until January 20th. And that was great, but we wanted to go longer than that even. So we sent cows. This is the second winter trying to send some cows down to Nebraska to graze corn stalks there. And we don't supplement them with any protein. They don't get any hay. It's just what they can grab and what they can eat, and what they can find is what they get. And that trial run down to Nebraska was kind of the big question mark. Will they, after being on corn stalks from end of October until the first week in March, and then hopping on a trailer and riding 500 miles home, and we fed them when they got home 2-year-old rye, kind of just nothing special at all. What was going to happen? Would they throw a bunch of calves, abort a bunch of calves, and would they get bred back? But we didn't lose a single calf, and we had a 95% breed back on those cows. We were blown away. So, I mean, we were really happy that things seemed to be, they were working, I guess.
One of these days, I will get all the crap out of my herd and have those conception rates. Someday I'll get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't feed, you know, I try not to, and I really didn't want to. So last winter I used like I consider it a high quality tub. I used Cattle Active.
Mm,
I think it was a 30% tub with some probiotic in it, and
mhm,
went through a lot of it. Was it a good product? Yeah. Well,
mhm,
when we got into this spring, I made my winter. I want to try to get my winter protein decision made in the spring.
mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
make sure I have that source secure to make sure I have that coming, whether it's, contracting alfalfa, making sure I've got blocks or cubes, whatever. I mean,
Mhm,
I think it pays to be proactive and get that stuff secured ahead of time because you're going to need it.
mhm.
So I kind of looked at the cost of the tubs and talked it over with my partner that we were commingled. We commingled for over 270 days with these cows.
Wow. Okay.
It started to get dry and he wanted to feed them a little more aggressively than I was feeding mine. So he took them home and I said, okay, that's just that many less days. I got to go beat my feed truck up and feed everything. So,
Yeah.
we're down to feeding, about 8 pounds per head of 20% alfalfa every third day.
Okay.
Other than that,
Okay.
you got to live on native range. I even took the salt away
8 pounds.
from 60 days ago.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's not bad at all. And that's what, well, I was just talking to somebody earlier today, actually from Oklahoma, and he kind of saw, I mean, that was the big shift in his mindset when he moved down there. He moved from Ohio to Oklahoma, actually, and talked about that surprise of trying to graze stockpiled warm season grasses and how that's very different than stockpiling cool season grasses. And there almost needs to be some sort of a supplement. And well, I have no idea, but I was curious how the quality. Do you have any idea how the quality of warm season grasses compare to like corn stalks? Because that is technically a warm season grass, but
Technically, yes, corn is a grass. I have a hard time seeing corn as a real grass because of how much it's been manipulated.
yeah.
Man, and I'm not talking GMO, I'm talking crossbreeding, interbreeding, hybridizing it.
Mhm.
It's the corn we grow. Yes, it is technically a grass and it fits into that family, but I would argue that it's just so far removed from anything
Yeah.
resembling a wild plant that
Mhm.
it's kind of something different. We've bred it and
Yeah.
engineered it to, to grab all these sugars and store all these sugars everywhere in the plant, especially in the kernel. And
Yeah.
that's why they can live on corn stalks for longer, is because
Mhm.
there are some cured sugars in there in with the dry matter.
Yeah. And that makes sense. I would, that's kind of what I was wondering. I mean, a lot of this is bred for even corn silage, like the whole plant, not just the kernel and stuff is bred for, feed quality. So I imagine that's not all going to go away when it goes dormant.
So the analog is, for me, is making sure that I have a chance. I give my warm season grasses a chance to complete stage 4 of growth, which is putting up
Mhm.
the big stem and seed head. I mean, I love going out and walking through chest high Indian grass. I mean, just in mid-September.
Mhm.
Mid-September, when the Indian grass is in full bloom, is one of my favorite times of the year.
Hmm.
And if you turn cattle in, there's about a 3, almost a 4 week period where they will run in and they will strip those seeds out of that Indian grass seed head first. That's the first thing they go for
Really?
pasture. Yeah. I
Huh.
mean, you're talking a tiny little seed and they got to get a lot of them, but those
Yeah.
cows know there's something in there that they want. Just like we see them eating all kinds of weird shit like yucca blooms,
Mm-hmm.
like I had a group that would go into the sandhill plum thickets and ignore the leaves and eat the green ones. Only the green ones, not the red ripe ones. Tell me
Yeah.
why.
Well, I mean, that's what, and I'm not finished it yet. I think it's sitting right behind me. The Fred Provenza book, Nourishment. Have you read that?
No, I haven't. I should.
Okay.
Hopefully,
I
he's a future guest on the Ranching Reboot podcast. Fred.
well, I hope to get him on mine too. So yeah, it's incredible what he does. I mean, I feel bad. I always laugh because I imagine he had to have some sort of a grad student or something do this research. But he talks in the one book about they followed around a cow. Like what I'm imagining, and I don't know if this is exactly how it happened. Was he said, "All right, grad student, you're following Bessie. you're following, old Betsy or whatever, follow them all throughout the day. And every time they take a bite, try and, essentially they would try and grab the same bite and represent what they got. And then they ended up taking that and doing a nutritional test on what that cow had eaten based on what they kind of grabbed. And they found that cow had picked like the perfect ration. I mean, it was incredible. I feel bad for that grad student, but it was pretty neat to read.
So I had heard that I was down on the south end of the ranch back in the spring, moved him into a paddock that I knew had really great cool season grass down around this little pit pond and in the creek that comes out of it. And I knew where there's some other really good stuff up this draw. So we moved him in, made a sweep, made sure we had them all cleaned out of the other ones, grabbed them in with tubs, moved them over. And then I looked, saw where the cattle were. Half of them were in a corner. They were over in the southeast corner where there wasn't a whole lot of grass. And I'm thinking, there shouldn't be anything up there. Why are they up there? So we jumped in the gator and buzzed over there and looked. Well, they were eating this clover that was about 6 inches tall that I couldn't see through the grass. So real quick, like I grabbed a big old handful of it and ran out the gate and, got my little plant smasher and smashed it down, got the juice to put on my bricks meter. And I looked, 26 bricks.
Wow.
No wonder
awesome.
They wanted to go over to that corner of the pasture and get that clover. Now, these cows had never been on the ranch before. How did they know it was there? And how did they get there within 5 minutes after being moved into that pasture?
That's incredible. I'm curious, what are your bricks typically on your natives in that region?
Okay, so I like to measure my bricks around 2 p.m. during the summer. Peak, that's around peak photosynthesis. That's close to when you're going to get your peak sugars. We can argue about the pennies and like what time was solar maximum or when was peak photosynthesis. You know what? 2 o'clock's good enough for my work. So I try to measure, if I'm going to make a serious measurement, I try to look at it at 2 o'clock.
Sure.
And most of the year, a lot of my warm season grasses, they're staying down in the 3, 4, 5 range. But when they're really good to eat, when I notice the cattle are really selecting them, those things are up in the 6 to 8 range. So I had like just after we'd get a little bit of moisture, get a little flush of growth. One day I could get 6. And the next day go to the same area on the same plants and barely get 4.
Interesting.
So our native plants are definitely not going to be as sweet as anything we're going to plant. And bricks directly correlates to growth. Doug Ferguson says that. I think Zietzman says that. 4 to 5 range, you're going to put on pound and a half a day. You get up around 6 and it's closer to 2. You get up like 16 bricks, you're putting on 4 pounds a day. I mean, you're really
like feedlot ration.
I wonder what feedlot ration would be if you ground it up and put it on a bricks meter.
It'd be worth trying. I'd be curious.
Be pretty high. That'd be really high.
No, that's interesting. And I've always wondered. I've heard, maybe I don't know what kind of region you're in and stuff, but some of that western. No, that's more short grass, I guess. That's got the punch. It's supposed to just have this punch people talk about. I don't really know. Ours is pretty high water, protein mix and stuff, but that more warm season or western grasses are just, they got this punch that everybody talks about that gets cattle growing like crazy. Is that a bricks thing or something else in the grass?
It's a bricks thing and it's a growth phase thing. So sometimes you got to kind of consider the source, right? What are these guys managing like they're saying that this, just short grass has a lot of punch on it and put a lot of weight on? Look at their pasture. And if it all looks like a pool table, the old saying, if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. I think there's a lot of guys that think that something is good grass when they've never really seen what good grass is.
No, I'm sure that's true.
I've driven to the western end of the state several times, out to Denver, out to Albuquerque. And it always used to blow my mind where I'd hear people from just a few miles west of me say, "Oh, well, Alexander, we can't grow that blue stem here. We can't grow that Indian grass here. This is short grass prairie. You're just right on the edge." And I believed it until you drive all the way out to like Ulysses or Colby or Holly, Colorado, and you see fucking big blue stem and Indian grass growing 6 foot tall in the ditches.
Yeah.
Pasture next door is grazed to an inch high. Like, let's consider the source here.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's relevant with so much right there, right? How much are people actually looking actively at what they're doing and how that impacts what they're used to? I mean, gosh, it's
an even more fun comparison to do down the ditch. Like if you've got places that are broke up between, you know, a mile of pasture and then some row crop ground, ride down that stretch of road and look at what the ditches look like next to that pasture. You might have some fairly healthy tall, well, I say healthy. You'll see some taller grasses. You'll see some bigger plants. You'll see probably less weeds.
Yeah.
Get by that farm field, it's either going to be kind of full of one weed or full of one really crappy type of grass. Why is that?
Yeah.
I mean, even if the pasture is totally abused and grazed to dirt, the ditch is still going to reflect that that pasture is clean to life in some way. But what the ditches are telling me next to those farm fields is those farm fields are been so sprayed with such a high herbicide load that it's just creeped out under the fence and nothing can grow in that bar ditch.
Yeah. No, I like the comparison of the ditches and stuff too, because in everything is like management. Whether you could turn the cattle out in spring and pick them up in the fall and say you don't really manage them, but that's you're managing for something. In our area, I mean, it's long term. It's selecting for Kentucky bluegrass. I mean, it's lawn. It's essentially like a lawn and stuff like that. And people look at our pastures and see them; they're pretty different. And honestly, people are like, "What? You got all those weeds out there? All those." Yeah, I don't know. We plant diversity, and people just think it's ridiculous and stuff. But it's exactly it's beautiful.
It's not a weed. It's just good cow feed, man. Like
exactly. Yeah.
I remember several years ago, I went to a KNRC thing, and one of the presentations was how to get cows to eat Palmer amaranth. And me being a, you know, not necessarily a book educated guy, I don't know what Palmer amaranth is. I know what pigweeds are. Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
As it turns out, they're kind of the same thing.
Same. Yeah.
And I think cows love pigweeds. Like I turn cows into a pasture of pigweeds and they're not there in 30 minutes. Like they go straight for them and just absolutely destroy them. But apparently cows or pigweeds in a cornfield is kind of a bad thing. So people were trying to get their cows to figure out how to eat the pigweed. Like it's easy. They'll want to eat it. Like, because it's usually a really, really high in sugar. It's a really palatable plant.
Speaking of bricks, like you mentioned earlier, my wife and I were driving around on the four-wheeler doing bricks readings here and did, you know, some grass over here, some clover over here, some whatever over here. And then we did ragweed. We have a ton of ragweed. That's our biggest problem on our farm. And with the organic cropping, and ragweed has been, I don't know if you know what that is, if you got that in your region at all or not, 10 foot tall, massive weeds and stuff. Our cattle. No, our cattle take after, you know, they're all over the field, nipping the leaves, ripping the leaves off of that ragweed. And that was the highest bricks reading of anything that we tested that day. Grasses, clover, you know, everything. It was the ragweed. And so now, like when people look out and I see what a weedy pasture, everything is just another diverse forage species and stuff. You know, in a cornfield, sure, you're missing out. The ragweed is our worst enemy in the cornfield. And I spent many a years pulling weeds, and that was one of the reasons why we wanted to go to crops too, or cattle and pasture. I hated pulling weeds. We in high school, we had my whole football team would go out in the summers and just pull ragweed up and down the rows, hundreds of acres, just one row under your legs, one on each side, yanking ragweeds out and stuff. So never will I have to do that if I just let a cow eat it. And so yeah, another advantage of pasture.
Yeah, it's not a weed, it's just good cow feed. Well, my cows won't eat it. Well, your cows are spoiled rotten and they don't know how to eat. They don't know how to eat.
Well, I think part of it is like they may not eat it, not because it's not good for them or because they won't like it, because they've never learned to eat it and stuff. Like honestly, when we put the high stock density in, we're fortunate. That's one advantage of our area, high rainfall and stuff. We can do stock densities in excess of 500,000 pounds per acre if we wanted to and stuff. I mean, fairly consistently, when you force them, when you get high stock density over 100,000 pounds, 200,000 pounds, they're going to eat whatever's in front of them. Yeah, they're going to eat it just because they want something, or the neighbor's going to get it, and they're not going to get a bite. So once you get them, forcing them to eat that ragweed, the next time you bump that population down to 40,000 pounds or less, or whatever, you can give them free range and they'll choose the ragweed because they now see that, oh yeah, I've eaten that. That was actually pretty darn good. So it's kind of neat.
So what kind of bricks readings are you getting on your stuff?
Yeah.
Like,
gosh,
see, I don't mind sharing
better,
mine, but there's been a couple times where I've shared mine and been like, well, hey, what's yours? I'm like, well, that's a proprietary secret. Really?
No,
Come on, man.
Yeah. And gosh, I feel like dumb because I can't even remember now. I look at it. I want to say 8 to 10, but I could be totally off. We can get into the teens. I've seen in the teens multiple times, but when I think we were looking, and that ragweed, I think was 18. I'm pretty sure that day, but I can't even remember what the rest of it was. It sounds like you do it quite regularly. I probably do it once a year, say that's neat, and forget about it. I need to do it more regularly.
A couple times a week, if I remember.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm not
so
doing
do you
it every
see
day.
seasonal patterns and different paddocks and things like, do you actually see trends when you're doing it that regularly?
I'm not yet. I'm still trying to collect data.
Mhm.
I mean,
Sure.
just 2 years of 2 years of data points isn't really a whole lot.
Yeah. And you are keeping track and recording them?
I have a book.
That's awesome. Oh, that's super cool. You gotta get you to share that sometime down the road when you have something to like show for it, because I'm sure it'll change as your management and stuff changes. I'm excited. That's neat.
Yeah, and trying to keep track of everything between this is the management we've been doing here, this is management we've been doing here, and track those, and track that trend over a long time and say, okay, this is bricks, this is the bricks representative in this area before we moved them in, and then this is what it was like 2 days post graze, 21 days, 45, things like that. Like, love to have the time to be able to do all that data collection, but cows got to move, fence has to be checked, mineral has to be hauled.
That's the tough thing about all the things that I would love to record data points on and stuff. Like we picked up a pasture in 2016, and I before that said, next pasture we get or next farm we get, I want to go out and do all these different data points and soil tests and water infiltration and penetrometer tests, and just so that when we manage 4 years down the road, 5 years down the road, we'll be able to show. And it's like, then we got the pasture, spring came around, we're calving, we're moving cows, we're planting crops, never got to it, and here we are 4 years later and still just like nothing. Just
hey, the samples would have been awful cool.
Yeah, it would have been.
Yeah,
but
I think it's always kind of fun when you go to like a farm conference. I mean, even some ranching conferences, and they're like, have you ever thought about soil testing? Sure have. What's your pitch? Well, this is what we want to look for, and this is the sample we take, and this is how we process it, and this is how much it costs. Okay, great. How close do you want to sample? Oh, we usually do a 10-acre grid. Okay, 10-acre grid. Let me get my calculator out. 10-acre grid on 7,000 acres is, that's about three
expensive.
times what I make on cows in a year. So
yeah. No, I think I'm not a cropping expert, but I think those guys do. Even some of them are 2-acre grids. Is that it? I'm not sure. I mean, it's wild. Some of the people on their testing and how precise with their precision ag and stuff they get with their variable rate everything and stuff. But I don't know if that pencils as well on or on pasture land, or especially on range land down in your country. So
yeah, the precision ag and making sure we get the right amount of chemical in the exact right spot to the inch. I support that. I mean, it's less waste. It's less waste, it's less chemical use, it's less diesel fuel. And in the end, that's better for all of us. So, I support that stuff.
Yeah. They'd have to put a pretty good argument together to say how it's going to pay for you.
Right. Yeah. So I'm kind of curious, how long have you guys been raising bulls for Pharaoh?
I asked Dad, and he can't remember the exact year. It's been, we think 13, could have been 14 years now. We've been doing that. And that kind of happened. Dad was down there buying a bull because he was raising kind of low input grass-based genetics and came across Pharaoh and bought one and got talking and kind of got tied into them that way and stuff. So we've been with them ever since. Yeah.
Has that been a pretty good deal for you guys?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it has. And it's, I mean, up in my area, I'd say one of the biggest advantages, my dad and grandpa were selling bulls, like I say, for decades. But in my area, almost everything is cropland. And the people who have cows have 10 to 20, 30, maybe 40 cows out on a little chunk of pasture that's too steep or too rocky to run crops on. It's not really, they don't take it seriously and they don't put a whole lot of money into it. And so to be able
Probably
to
haul
market
feed to
bulls,
them 9 months out of the year.
what's that?
Probably haul feed to them 9 months out of the
Yeah.
year.
Yeah. For sure. Most are at least 5 months, 6 to 7 months, probably more realistically for most guys that I know of are feeding somehow. And it's, it's not really maybe they think it is or something. I would say it's not really a large contributing factor of their profit to their overall operation. And so to sell bulls in this region is there's not that many customers and they don't pay as much as when you get out in cattle country. So it's been advantageous for us just to kind of connect into some of the Western markets, some of the more cattle country markets and stuff that we have. So yeah, overall, we've been really happy with it. And I mean, I do believe in their program, obviously, and stuff we're doing. It's neat to see these cattle work in different environments and stuff. So we've been fortunate to get connected with them and then just to learn what a great group of people willing to think differently and stuff too. But
There's a couple of Pharaoh Cattle Company bulls I've had my eyes on for a while.
oh yeah, the
Yeah,
AI catalog or
yes.
mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure how I feel about that because, trying to AI a bunch of horned cattle is probably not the most intelligent operation to undertake.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking,
Mm-hmm.
I'm really thinking there's a couple Mashona bulls that are in a catalog that are very attractive to me
Mm-hmm.
for
Yeah.
mostly the carcass traits and what I think they'll do with the genetics that I'm developing.
Yeah. Well, I know you've been, I heard you talk on one of your past podcasts and stuff too, about kind of your goal of, sounds like trying to do a similar thing of raise these low input, tough cattle that fit your environment. And someday you'd like to get to a point where you're marketing either females or maybe some males and stuff too, right? That's a goal of yours.
100%. Like,
yeah,
my cows, I don't think anything of mine's probably ever going to see the inside of a sale barn anymore.
Yeah.
Because I'll admit I sold some there and that was probably the dumbest place I ever could have sold any.
Mm-hmm.
I take that one. But from here on out, everything's closed. Okay. Every calf being born this year was bred on the ranch. I can't say that for last year's calf crop or the calf crop before that.
Mm-hmm.
But this calf crop is the first one hitting the ground that is 100% me from conception onwards. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the product I want to be proud to put my name behind.
Sure.
Hopefully when a couple of them get peeled and and go to freezer camp in 2025, I'll have something worth having.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
Okay.
That's the goal.
So because you're primarily like a Coriani kind of base, is that right?
Corrientes, Longhorns, and there were some crosses in there that I bought, but yeah.
So for some reason, this seems to be a thing as of late. I've had a bunch of people reaching out wanting to learn more about that. So I mean, are you is your herd, do you hope it to be kind of purebred and you sell crossbred calves? Do you want to have a crossbred, like a 50% mama cow? What's your kind of goal for your program?
Well, we bred in Angus last year and we had quite a few opens and, I didn't have any marketing figured out. So I said, well, okay, well, let's add some value back. So we turned in some bulls for 45 days to try for a fall breed. I know there's at least 3 or 4 of them that didn't catch. No big deal. So we've got some Angus in them. We've got some Flekovich influenced Simmental in them, which I was really happy with the carcass size on those bulls. Like they're a full frame smaller than the black ones, but but they're carrying a full condition higher.
Sure. Yeah.
When you could carry a 7 on a frame 6 versus a 6 on a 6, I know what I want to have in my cows. So
yeah.
as far as breeding up next year, got 3 text messages while we've been doing this interview, trying to get that worked out. So
Okay.
I'm not sure if we're going to come back on top with Angus or with something a little different, but most likely it'll be Angus. I want to
Mhm.
get to where I have a 50-50 base herd.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then maybe we can kind of moderate that 50-50 base herd and start to look at some more, I guess, terminal type traits. But for now, I'm more concerned with developing my maternal herd.
Mm.
Maternal
Sure.
herd and the Angus and the Sim bulls are to try to bulk up or to try to put another frame size on the Corriente.
Okay. Hmm.
And hopefully what I keep from the Corriente is their stayability, their foraging ability, their
Mhm.
inherent health and pest and disease resistance.
And just their efficiency isn't that one of the biggest things about them? They're just like they can make it by on dirt almost. Is that
So you can just about feed them sticks, rocks, and dirt and make them drink air and they can get along okay. Your conception
yeah.
rate might not be the best, but
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can push them really, really hard.
Yeah.
And they know how to eat everything in the pasture.
Mhm.
The core group that I've got here, they're with me strip grazing and I mean we had those things at 45 to 55,000 pounds per acre on a daily move. If it was in the
Mhm.
pasture, they had to eat it. Like there's willow trees that they eat, and some of them
Yeah.
developed enough of a taste for the willow trees that they'll go seek that out the first couple hours in a pasture if there's a good one.
Mhm.
Like it's weird to see a cow running past green grass and green weeds that are super high in bricks and super high in nutrients, and she's
Yeah.
going to eat a dang willow tree.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's the truth. It's something you just made me think back to that Fred Provenza book and stuff where he talks about all of the other like nutrients and like the secondary to tertiary nutrients and stuff and these other things that they can balance their diet. Cows are so dang smart if you let them. If you let them. And that's the one thing that I love about your environment anyway, that it seems like that we don't have much of here is the extent of the diversity. I imagine you've got way more diversity than we have even in our pastures, which we try to seed in diversity is nothing like native rangeland.
So we'll throw out a couple terms here. Native range gets thrown out a lot. Okay. And I don't want to discourage anybody from using the term native range because it's very
Mhm.
descriptive of, of a forage condition. But there's a new term I'd like to start using, and that's old growth grassland.
Okay.
Okay. And that's grassland that's never been fucked up with a plow,
Yeah.
never been
Yeah.
planted, never been farmed. You can take a piece of farm ground, plant natives in it, decent management. In a few years, it's back to native range, but it will never be
Sure.
old growth grassland again because old
Yeah.
growth grassland is going to be defined by the soil structure that's been developed since the last ice age,
And
in my mind.
yeah.
So that being said, the whole place is about 7,000 acres. Of that, maybe 500 or 600 of it was ever farmed. Zero of it
Okay.
farmed now.
Yeah.
So, and I can tell differences on the places that have been farmed that are planted back to native range. And it was a process. Dad started planting them back in 1986, 85,
Mhm.
86, right after he took over the ranch because he didn't want to farm. Like the
Yeah.
farm tractor that he got was a 65 horsepower open cab Massey Ferguson. I think the
Okay.
biggest tool that would fit that he had that was out here that would go behind it was like 10 feet.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that ain't
Yeah. No.
so that all
Wow.
got planted back to native grass.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was growing up going down there and there was never really anything impressive growing. It wasn't until I moved away and came back from the Navy that there was actually some impressive grass growing down there. In
Mhm.
the late 90s, he came back and put a forb mix on it because what he seeded it with in the 80s was just straight grass seed. It didn't have any forbs in it at all because thinking at the time, we don't want to put weeds out there. Cows don't eat weeds. Cows eat grass. So let's just seed it all to grass. What a short-sighted and uneducated mindset that was.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in the 90s, late 90s, he went back out and put some forbs back on it. And once those forbs started to get established, I could use the pasture. And there were a couple years that I used it just perfect, and we got the perfect rain right after I used it just hard enough and I had enough rest. And well, next thing you know, we've got 5-6 foot tall big blue stem and Indian grass and switchgrass coming back, and healthy little blues, and all the other, like the grama grasses, and everything was coming back. Even the forbs were coming back. So
yeah, that's cool. We've wanted, a couple years back, we like looked pretty seriously at planting more natives in our region up here, and kind of what we learned and talked to people, and it sounds like it took you quite a while to get it established and stuff like that. And here it was going to be, people were saying 3 years up to 5 years to kind of get it established, where we really got to baby it and take some time and kind of be easy on it. And when you're honest, I mean, we could probably get at least $250, if not $300+ an acre land rent here. When you're setting land kind of aside, or not really harvesting much off of it for 2 to 5 years to try and get something established, it's a pretty expensive establishment cost. And I don't know if they call our stuff improved grasses, these kind of cool season mixes and stuff that we get now, and I don't know if they're really improved or not. They're improved in some some ways, maybe the nutritional content, not so much the hardiness and the stability of some of the other plants and stuff, but that's kind of the route we've gone, just because it seems like it just isn't cost effective for us to try and establish warm season native mixes up here. But
I remember my dad telling me something, and it was a long time ago. He said, no matter what you do, don't ever get involved with the grass of the month club.
Okay.
And I've kind of lived by that.
Yeah.
There have been several opportunities, and places that, to plant something like, no, I don't want that. I don't want that. I don't want that improved grass. I don't want that. Because I think the lessons we've been learning, a lot of these grasses that are quote improved, and the one that comes to mind right now is like the current devil of the plains, old world blue stem.
Yeah.
We bred that in the lab. Like, we bred it to be allopathic and allotropic and spread and be drought resistant. Problem is, we didn't breed it to be palatable for cows. So it establishes really easy. It's drought tolerant, fire tolerant, chemical tolerant. Like, you could spray old world, like the yellow and Caucasian types that I have here. We sprayed some to absolute bare soil for 3 years in a row. Like, nuked it to bare soil.
Yeah.
And guess what's growing there?
Same stuff.
Same stuff. Old world blue stem and nothing else.
Yeah. Man.
So it's almost like we bred a super grass that doesn't do much for cows. Okay, do cows eat it? Yes. There's not much nutrition in it. Like, I've never been able to get a Brix reading from old world blue stem.
Really?
Period.
Huh. Wow. You don't have any other ruminant species like sheep or goats or anything? No. Okay.
I wish I did.
Yeah. Wish I had them about a year ago.
Yeah. It's a lot of ground to cover, and I'm just one guy. And I guess I'll say it because it's on my podcast and I can get away with it. If you want to come out here and run sheep and goats and make me an offer, like, I might not even charge you for it. Just bring them out here, because I need some goat brush control in places. Like, links in the show notes. You get with me.
That's awesome. Yeah. No, that's one thing that I talked to Luke Perman not too long ago. I don't know if you've met him or talked to him or anything, who brought in custom sheep. He's on one of my episodes and stuff. It brought in a couple thousand sheep, just custom grazing. And, he says he doesn't think it's affected his cattle, like how much forage he has for cattle. So it's not really affected his stocking rate. He gets a custom feed. They're taking care of weeds that he otherwise would have had to spray. I mean, it's like, what a win, 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 win. Everyone around winning when you start messing with some of these other ruminants and provide opportunity for, a young guy, someone in your community, maybe who wants to get started in something that doesn't have a ranch of their own. It's pretty neat.
I'd love to help a young person get started with sheep and build a business. Like, I'd love for that, because underutilized resource, it's a demand. 2 fastest growing ethnic groups in the country are the Muslims and the Hispanics, and they like sheep and goat.
Yeah. Yeah, someone was telling me, and I don't know if there's any truth to this or not, but like that it's sheep anyway is the only industry with increasing demand and reducing supply consistently over, the last however many decades. It's continuously increased supply or increased demand, reduced supply. That's good. That's a good thing to be in that industry.
I can believe that. I was just sitting here thinking, like, I kind of almost have this theory, and it's not even a half-baked theory. Did the sheep industry go by the wayside because big meat couldn't figure out a way to industrialize it? I mean,
It's a good question. I guess I always assumed, and I have no idea, but assumed that it was because I've always heard the ranches of the West were paid for with sheep, and then nobody ever really liked them necessarily. So once they had the ranch paid for, it's like, well, now we can do what we want. Let's move back to these cows and stuff or something. But I don't know if that's any sort of a factual theory or not. That's just what I've kind of wondered.
well, in the last few years, I've been fortunate enough to work with some of the old cowboys that worked out here on this ranch in the 60s and 70s. And that knew my great-great-grandfather. Yeah, and that knew my great-great-grandfather to put all this crap together. And tell me that he went broke with cows many times.
Yeah.
And he always got back. And whenever he'd go broke with cows, he'd get sheep, make a fortune on sheep in like 2 years, get rid of the sheep and get back in cows, lose his ass in a couple of years, and then go back to sheep.
Wow. All for the love of the cow, huh? Man.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
That's funny. Yeah.
I heard it first on Clay Connery's Excellent Working Cows podcast. He's my pod father.
Yes. Yeah.
Is he yours?
Yeah, I like that. He's probably the ag or the ranching pod father. I mean, yeah, I remember the first time I heard a podcast at a wedding from a buddy of mine, and I just started typing in like into the search bar, cows, cattle, ranch things, and found Working Cows podcast. It was one of the first ones I listened to, and I was like, well, here we go. This is it. So,
when he calls me, I answer the phone. Yes, Podfather.
I like that. That's good.
No, what were you saying before I was going off on that?
Oh, that's where you heard it, maybe?
Yeah, that's where I heard it the first time, was that they keep the sheep out back to pay for all of it. The cows around the horse, or cows around the house for the appearances for the neighbors and the family.
Yeah.
And they keep the horses out by the road for the tourists. And the sheep are out back paying.
That's funny. Yeah. That's probably, it's interesting because I've heard that from more than one place, this value of sheep and stuff. Yet I've wanted to get more sheep guests on, and I cannot find just about anybody who's got them or has experience with them or has a story to tell about their grandfather building a ranch with sheep. There's just not many people out there who actually do it. So, yet it sounds like every ranch was built with them. So,
well, hey, let's put the call out. If you can relate a story about building a ranch, paying for ranches with sheep, like that you've heard from your grandfathers, or you're still part of an operation, or you have something to say about that, reach out to me, reach out to Jared over on Herd Quitter.
Yes.
Tell those stories. I've had a lot of requests for sheep episodes, but trying to find sheep producers, guys, you got to reach out to us. We'd love to do a platform to tell your stories.
Yeah. That's good call. Yep. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, for sure.
So what did inspire you to get into podcasting?
Well, it was Clay and the Working Cows podcast. I mean, there was a big part of it. I always wanted to. And then I was like, well, if I can find someone that does it, I'll just listen. I don't really need to do a podcast. I just want to hear these things and learn. So I found Clay's podcast and was like, this is great. Went several years. And then I took this job with SFA, and they have a podcast that we talk to a lot of local farmers here in Minnesota, that I do quite a few of the interviews on that one for them and stuff. And we talk with everything from vegetable farmers to dairy farmers to all sorts of stuff. And that just got me experience in actually doing any sort of a conversation like this. I had no idea if I could maintain any sort of a conversation. I had no clue how I would do it that. So after I had a few under my belt with that, I was like, well, this is fun and all, but I really want to talk to cattlemen and more, all over the country. And so I had a little bit of experience. I was confident enough to get started, and I always wanted to do it. And so, at that point, I just went ahead and did it. And I don't remember how I got started. I talked with Kit Farrow and stuff to see if he had some people. I wanted to get him on it and talk to him a little bit to see if he wanted to participate in it somehow, and he was open to that. And so, and we just started going, and it's been not quite a year now, right around a year. I don't remember when the first episode was released, right around a year ago now. So
we started at the same time, like
I know,
weeks of each other.
Yeah. I remember Clay saying on his podcast, I had him come on as one of my first, and he said that he'd got 2 new ones starting. I was like, well, I know I'm one of them. Who's the other guy?
The one that started right when we did.
Well, it was you. Well, it was me, and then you, as he had said, unless there was somebody else. Yeah. And then not too long after that, the ranching or the Roots and Ruminants came out too. They do a good one as well.
Yeah. I'll admit I don't catch too many ag podcasts these days because I do want, and I don't always want my content to be derivative.
Yeah.
But I have listened a couple of yours. I listened to a bunch of Clay's. But a lot of times it's just nice to put on Joe Rogan and, have a 3-hour show. Have a 3-hour show to zone out to.
Yeah. No, I enjoy his as well. And that was something where I was like, how do I want to structure this? And it was funny because when I first started, 30 minutes was fine, 30 to 40 minutes I could get and stuff, but it felt more like I was working for it. But as you start going into it, these you throw away the questions and the agenda and just let a conversation happen. You can talk for however long, however long you got time for. That's never been the issue.
I've got a couple bullet points, and if I run out of that,
Exactly.
I've got a cheat sheet posted on the wall.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, it's great. And I don't know, Joe Rogan is a pro at it. He's got his 3-hour long every time and stuff, and seems to make it seem so effortless. And I never understood how he can do that. But once you get the right people having a conversation, there's endless content. I mean, you can talk for a long time. That's rarely the issue. Have
you been lucky enough to get the chance to do one of these face to face yet?
No, I did one with my dad where I talked to him about our history. That was the only one I've done in person. I'm almost nervous too, because I told Dad if we do another one, he's going to do it from his computer in his house, because I don't have the tech or the know-how to do it in person, and I didn't like having one audio file. So
okay, I can understand that. I actually am really fortunate. I have a friend that has a professional quality podcast studio.
Okay.
That lets me use. It only takes it's like 35-40 minutes to get there.
Sure.
And he has a restaurant, so if we're going to schedule an interview in his studio, I always make sure I take my guest out to have a nice meal at his lovely restaurant, either before or after. But he's got like the same Rodecaster Pro that I do, but he's got different microphones. So I just got to take a memory card, pop my settings in. Man, we sit down, do the thing. It's a big table with 4 mics, and you kind of get them a little bit out of the way. You just kick back and have a great conversation. I'm telling you, like, we're sitting here doing this, and I keep glancing at the clock just to see where we're at. Doing one in the studio, like, I look over and it's like, man, we've been doing this forever. I look over and it's been going for 6 minutes. Like, oh, shit, is this ever going to get going? I look over again, it's like 30. I'm like, okay, that's fine. All right, we're on a roll here.
Yeah.
And then like 10 minutes later, I'm like, all right, we've had a good conversation. Let's see where we're at. And I look over and it's like 2:01. I'm like, oh, we got an episode, boys.
Yeah. No, it's weird. Even after 55 or whatever, every time I'm still a little nervous beforehand. Like, is this gonna go okay? Is this gonna be the one where I should have prepared for? But after 10, 20, 30 minutes in, they just keep rolling. So, but I need to get your tips on that in-person, the tech, because that's my biggest fear why I haven't really done it. And actually I should do it before I go to you can get your bell ready, Ranching for Profit school in April. There we go. Before I go to the Ranching for Profit school in April, so that I can see if I find somebody with neat stories there and actually talk to them in person is what I would love to do, but I have no clue how to do it right now. So
Yeah, maybe we can get together, like, shoot me a text or give me a call. We could kind of, get together offline so I can see what equipment you're dealing with and
yeah, that'd be
what's going
great.
on there. But so where is that Ranching for Profit school?
Oklahoma City. Yeah.
John Locke will be your instructor.
Yeah. I was supposed to go to Minot with my dad here a couple weeks ago, but I ended up getting sick, so I had to stay home, and he went off and had all the brain numbing fun, I guess, of Ranching for Profit.
Well, you're still going to get John Locke as an instructor.
Yes.
He was scheduled for Minot as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Somebody asked what he did to deserve Minot in February, and the answer was Phoenix in January.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably fair punishment. Yeah.
For those that don't know, John was on podcast previously. Can't remember the episode off the top of my head. Jamie's not here to look it up. But John is from southwest of Houston, Texas. John does not like the cold.
The opposite of North Dakota. Yes.
Yeah. John is not a man that is made to enjoy cold weather, and he will tell you that himself.
Yeah. No, I can't blame a person, but at the same time, I also have zero desire to be in South Texas in the summer. So I would probably take Minnesota winter over that for sure, but for sure anywhere southeast with the humidity. I do not know how they can do it, and I'm pretty sure I would have a heart attack year one. So
drink a lot of water, I'm told.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Man.
So I want to hear about a wreck. Tell me about a wreck you've had and what did it teach you?
On our farm?
Yeah. Farm, ranch, cow.
Well, okay. So yeah, the closest thing I can think of, and I feel bad because it happened on another person's farm with our cattle and stuff, is so we wanted to extend our grazing season, right? So we were having really expensive winter feed costs, and so we started planting sorghum Sudan grass on our farm and doing a couple years of trials with that to see what we could do. And we were getting when we planted a cool season cover crop mix in the spring, hayed it off, and then planted sorghum Sudan grass mix and grazed that in the fall and winter. We were getting 180 plus cow days per acre that we were able to harvest off of that. And when we divided out our cost per cow day, it was well below what our cost per cow day of feeding hay was. And we did this and it went quite well for several years. And so then we had this farmer that we still graze stocks on this place every year. Great friend and really progressive crop farmer, no-till cover crops, doing fantastic stuff on really heavy wet ground. And he wanted to get livestock integration on his farm. And we wanted to kind of access more acres potentially to raise crops. And so we thought here might be a mutually beneficial way that we can pay him to raise a cool season mix, make hay on it, put a sorghum Sudan grass mix in and graze that in the winter. And so we went over to his place with our cattle in October, grazed corn stalks on it as long as we could, grazed corn stalks. And then with the plan being to go to the sorghum Sudan grass after the corn stalks when the snow was too thick or deep for the corn stalks. Well, by the time we got to the sorghum Sudan, the snow, it got really, that sorghum caught a lot of snow. And it seemed like by the time we got off the corn stalks, because it was too hard on the cattle, the sorghum Sudan was buried in snow and ice, and they got 30 cow days per acre off of that. And so we felt pretty bad because he had all the costs of what would have produced 180 plus cow days per acre, but he had to divide it across. We paid him on a per head per day basis kind of a thing. And we ended up, trying to make it work, but he kind of lost a lot of production out of that because it was all buried in snow and ice. And if we had gotten the full 180 to 200 cow days, it would have been a really good setup for him where he got paid a fair price. We got a significantly reduced cost for our winter feed costs. We don't have to run the sorghum on our own acres, so we could increase our pasture acres, run more cows, kind of increase turnover. It was going to be, we were really excited about the mutual benefit between it all and stuff, but it ended up being a total flop with that sorghum when we were grazing it in the middle of February, and it was buried in snow and ice, and we barely got anything off of it. So yeah, that's probably the biggest one I can think of.
So if somebody was sitting in, I don't know, let's just pick a town, LA, in a filing cabinet for humans, what would be some advice that you could throw their way if they wanted to do what we're doing? What would be the best advice you wish you had before you started in your ag career?
Man, well, to that point, I was fortunate to have my dad who'd been doing this for years. So I started off a lot better off than a lot of folks. I was fortunate to have that. But as far as advice to beginners with cattle production specifically is, I mean, especially if you're getting started, don't jump in with all the things you think you need. I mean, how many people get started buying a tractor, buying a hay rack and hay equipment and all the stuff you need to feed, you think you need to feed cattle and stuff. I mean, that's the one advantage of a grazing based system, is that you can get into it with little or no overhead. I mean, you can get into it without the equipment. So don't try and be the crop farmer. That's the reason why a lot of people start off with grazing enterprises as opposed to cropping up here, is because they can't afford to get all the cropping equipment. So don't try and play their game. Just let the animals do their own work, and then cull ruthlessly if you can. Yeah, I don't want to say that necessarily entirely as like a blanket statement. You should pull out all the stops and cull ruthlessly, because that could be financially destructive for a lot of people too. So, you got to work with what you got and try and, kind of make it work, but work towards reducing inputs, pulling out the crutches, selecting the animals that work. And I just had a fantastic conversation 2 weeks ago now with Jason Sargro, who talked about kind of a philosophy. We were trying to kind of come up with like, what are the principles, like the principles of soil health they talk about? What are the principles of profitable cattle production and stuff? And he said, like, one of the ones for cows would be to improve genetics, not from buying better bulls, but from culling out the worst, and let the environment select. And I was like, that's a really kind of revolutionary thought. Not revolutionary, I shouldn't say that, but a very insightful thought. I mean, improve your herd genetics, not through selecting in better genetics, but getting rid of the worst ones. And your herd in time will just become this group of cattle that fit beautifully in your environment.
And that's totally backwards from everything we read in the publications and the mainstream podcast, which is, you can improve your profitability with this bull, or, this breed is proven profit at this, or use this app to track your feed and track your cost and you'll make more money, or use this implant to improve this. Like, why don't we just take out the crap out of a herd that ain't working, that's holding the rest of them down?
Yeah. Well, I hear it all the time of just like, well, gosh, so I talked about a really good breed back on our cows, 93 to 95% for several years. The heifers ain't so pretty. The yearling heifers is 70 to 75, percent, and maybe 80% on a good year. And people are saying you could get 90, 95%, if you did this, or you added this, or you supplemented with that. And it's like, I would much rather have an open heifer than an open 4-year-old or 5-year-old. I mean, when we're culling them out at the beginning, we're setting up our herd so much better at the start for long-term, stability, because we've weeded out the ones that can't do it early on. And I'm okay with that too, because my wife and I direct market meat, so we just grass finish them and sell them for more than we could, as we get good money grass market or grass finishing beef too. So, you can get a premium for them, but it's a lot harder to do that with an open 5-year-old. Then you got a sale barn cow that's worth, a fraction of what she could be. So
those are the ones you put in the grinder and sell for $5 as burger.
And that's the thing we want to look for, is wholesale burger markets or beef stick markets, something we can capture out of our cows. That's what we would like to do. The other thing that we're considering after going to Doug Ferguson's sell by marketing school, and Wally Olson talks about it a lot too, is, that cows don't depreciate in a straight line. They drop off, year 4 or 5. So keeping a younger herd, selling them earlier. We don't have much fallout that early. I mean, after we get the heavy fallout early, we don't have that much after there. So we don't really have that many cows to sell at a sales barn. So it's not that much of a hit. And usually if we're culling at that point, we're culling out ones that are bred, that not opens. But there's always a few. And so far we've just gone to the sales barn with them. But we've been looking at beef sticks as kind of our cull cow market.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm on that level. It's just trying to find that pipeline and trying to get that pipeline built.
It's not easy.
Yeah.
And you hear about the pros, and there's a lot of people out there who've done an amazing job. And when I first started the podcast, I had a guest from Georgia, and somebody reached out and said, I love this. You got somebody from the Southeast who's not Will Harris. Well, just this morning I released Will Harris and because I've wanted to talk to him forever, but that person, I think I talked to him or something, and they said, at least if you're going to talk to Will Harris, talk more about the struggles like early on. It doesn't really do anybody any good to hear of this guy doing 20 million in sales and all how great this is and how fantastic that is and stuff. Hear about how he did it. And so that we tried to talk a lot early on about what were the actual challenges and how did you overcome them, because it's not easy. I mean, it sounds great, just go sell everything direct, but when you get to doing it, you realize the time commitment and the infrastructure requirements and everything just to move a head of beef to a consumer is not cheap or easy.
And labor requirements.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to grow them than it is to sell them. And,
yeah.
Oh gosh, I can't remember. I listen to so much stuff, but I was listening to one about, that beef producers have just willingly given up all of our marketing power. And it's true. We they sold the check off to all the producers back in the 80s. I didn't vote on it.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't vote on it, but we're still paying it.
Yeah.
They sold us the check off as saying, guys, we know you don't have time to market your stuff. Let us do that for you. Good sell, right? And at the time, I'm sure it was a great thing. And I'm sure that it worked well for a while. But history has proved that ever since the checkoff has been put into place, the cattleman share of the beef dollar has done nothing but go down.
Yeah. Well, I think it's you that maybe said it, or one of your guests. This conversation is one that I hear mostly, I feel like, from your podcast, but is how many cattlemen are actually selling beef? I mean, we're not selling beef, we're selling cattle. And yet the checkoff is they're marketing beef. They're not marketing 100%. Our cattle. And so we're paying them to market the Packers product.
We're
not
paying
ours.
them for their own advertising. Like we're giving them their advertising budget. Mm-hmm. Like, when was the last time you saw Tyson brand advertising one of their protein products? They don't have to, because we pay to advertise it for them through the checkoff.
Yeah.
We don't have Tyson, Cargill, JBS, Marfrig, Smithfield. They don't have to do anything to tell us how good the meat is. They don't have to do any marketing, because we pay a quote independent third party to do that.
Yeah.
And 100%, I'm in the cattle business. I want to be in the beef business, but I don't want to sell cattle to somebody that's in the beef business. Because let's face it, no matter what we take to the barn, they're paying us hamburger price.
Yeah.
They're paying us hamburger price and selling it for steak. Bottom line. And it wraps back around to that that they base these grids and formulas on the quote cash trade. Well, the overall volume of cash trade is so small, and they control it anyway, that they're basically continuing to manipulate the price further and further down on all these grid and formula contracts, and importing quote lean trim from Brazil. Like, bullshit. We import more than we export.
Yeah. It's interesting because I kind of, it's a challenge, no doubt. But you and I talk to people all over the country who are making a profitable business out of cattle and on grass. And so it's not in the commodity markets too. And so it's, no doubt is there challenges. No doubt is that maybe making things difficult and stuff too. But I think there's definitely ways that people can work with it, at least in the time. And that's kind of what we're trying to do, is do things differently. I mean, you maybe can't compete with the guys you can't compete with guys in the kind of more large scale feedlot type systems. You maybe can't get into this business and compete with them and stuff, but you don't need to. I mean, you can go the more low input route and be profitable from cow one, and then scale a profitable enterprise. And I don't know. It's interesting. I like Doug Ferguson. When I went to his class, spent like 2 hours talking to us about kind of this idea of our mindset and not being the victim, and that we can choose, we can be profitable in this industry if we do things differently. And I do believe that. But no doubt are there challenges too. So
It also needs to be said that I don't think that a person needs to feel guilty about taking advantage of the system the way it exists.
Mhm.
But on the other side of that coin is, as long as there's, desire to seek knowledge to do better.
Mhm.
And, there's a lot of guys that I know that are in the cattle business that just can't take their entire cattle business and shift it to a beef business, 1,000 head operations. It doesn't make sense for somebody to do that. And I'll admit that. Like, if you're that guy, it doesn't make sense for you to take everything you've been doing and those really high quality cattle that are in high demand at the feedlot, at the sale barn. It doesn't make sense to try to shift all that demand over to direct sell.
Mhm.
Take a percentage of it, select a couple of animals out of that, retain them, and put your name on those, and
Mhm.
start building your brand instead of giving away the best of yourself and the best of your genetics for Tyson to put their label on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like, I don't know when this will be released, but last week I think you released the one with George Walker, and they've done an amazing job of marketing. They're doing so good with direct marketing and building out their brand and stuff too. But he also was talking about the challenges that come with it. And I have a lot of people who come to me more with my job with SFA, and asking, how can we, we want to do this direct marketing. It sounds fantastic and stuff too. Maybe coming in a little ambitious, and there's some real challenges to that as well. But the reward is there. But there's some real reward and opportunity. And long term, the guys who have their own market, I feel like are going to be, I mean, you just have this whole level of control that no one else will ever be able to have long term if you can control your market from beginning to end, especially the guys who are big enough to have their own processing line and stuff too. That's where things kind of get exciting. And I liked with Will Harris, where he talked about that 100% of the consumer dollar comes to him in Bluffton, Georgia. And he has a lot of expenses that go out with that go to the pack, to all the 180 employees he works, to all the stuff. But 100% of that dollar, rather than going to the 50,000 head feedlot in Nebraska or the pack or wherever, stays in Bluffton, Georgia, in his community. How cool is that? I mean, when you start building, you can build communities with cattle. I mean, that's where things get exciting. I love that.
Cows build towns. And that's a direct Steve Stratford quote.
Yeah.
That's a hill that I'll die on shoulder to shoulder with him. Cows build towns. Will Harris has a model, and I'm not saying that it's 100% correct or will work everywhere, but it is a good model. It is a good framework for people to look at and say, if he can do that in Bluffton, Georgia, I can do something similar in Yankton, South Dakota, or Phoenix, Arizona, or Seattle, Washington. Like 80% of it's going to be common. 80% of it's going to be replicatable and it'll work somewhere else. It's just finding that 20% that you need to get there to just make it sing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly. And there's totally potential. There's, I don't know, we just did a search within 20 miles of the center, where we have a freezer space in the Twin Cities, where we market our meat out of. And we just kind of looked 20 miles around Edina, and there's like 3 million people or something in the Twin Cities. And it's like, why am I trying to, there's so many people who want my product within an hour from me. I mean, this opportunity is great. And we hear from so many customers, oh, we've been looking for someone like you for so long. And it's like, they're out there. They are everywhere. Just got to get in front of them somehow. And that's the challenge.
Figuring out how to connect the story that we want to tell to the consumer that wants to hear it.
Yeah.
That has been a challenge. Oh, like I said, I got out of the Navy in 06 and came back, and it was really around 07, 08. I started to kind of really get my head around some of these things. If you want to sell grass fed, trying to sell grass fed 10 years ago was an uphill battle. I mean, if you're trying to sell grass fed beef, everybody's laughing at you, nobody's listening. Now people are at least listening. And there's less people
Yeah.
that want to fight you on it, and there's more people seeking you out.
Yeah.
And I don't
Mhm.
know where I was going with that. I totally lost train of
I
thought.
don't know either, but it is interesting, like talking to these guys like Will Harris and Seven Sons in Indiana and stuff. They were the early ones on in like the early 2000s when no one else was doing it. The technology wasn't out there, but they also had a wide open market. So I kind of wonder, I don't know where I'd rather be. Would I rather be here where there's an awareness of the benefits of grass fed, the benefits of what we do, and there's the tools, like, all the tools there are for marketing and like all this, or would I rather be back there where there was no market, no tools, but no competition? That's no, yeah, there's advantages to each, I guess. So
I don't think we missed it. I think it's still coming.
yeah. Yeah. Do you know, is there a stat out there? I've wondered, is there a stat that says actually what percent of beef is purchased direct? I've never seen one, but I wondered.
No, I don't know. And well, how would you track that?
I'd be interested to see. I have no idea.
I don't
That's
even
not for me to
believe
figure out. That's for
I don't even believe the official USDA harvest statistics. Like,
yeah. Yeah.
that come from the big packing plants. I don't even
Mhm.
believe that bullshit.
Yeah.
But that would be something very interesting, very interesting to know. But I don't think
Yeah.
that, what kind of data collection would that require?
Hmm. And I'd be curious, and probably the best way to do it, I suppose, would be to go to like the graze carts, the barn to doors, the companies that are actually like they probably have the numbers, but maybe that's illegal to share that data. I don't know, but I'd be curious if we were, say, at 1%, let's say 1% of the whole population or the meat is direct marketed or something like that. I'd be curious then too how COVID affected that. If it
It
went
went
to
up.
2%, it would for sure went up to go 2%. Yeah, I mean, and it's like it could have totally doubled it, but it's still such this minor fraction. If we could have doubled the direct marketing, of the country, went from 1% to 2% maybe, but it's still this tiny fraction of the whole industry. Like there's so much potential in this direct marketing yet.
Well,
And
let's look at
everybody
it
who
this way.
buys beef, or go ahead.
Let's look at it this way, okay? So once an idea takes hold in 3% of the population, it's basically unstoppable.
Mhm.
So if we get 3% of the population on direct marketing grass-fed beef, that's unstoppable momentum, and that movement and that demographic will do nothing but continue to grow.
Yeah. And I would say, even what if it's not even just grass-fed beef? Like if we want to just support local communities, I mean, if every kind of beef, it can be grain-fed beef, grass-fed, all natural, whatever. But if they supported local, you can have the same impact on communities that Will Harris is having without, needing the grass. I mean, you can still get the same quality product at a reasonable price too. I mean, the people selling direct market or grain-fed beef, I don't know, $1-2 more per pound or something like that. And the average consumer eats 44 pounds of beef a year. So I mean, you're talking 100,
I'll pay
100
50%
pounds.
more per pound
Yeah.
from one of my friends that produces high quality beef. Since I
Yeah.
don't have my pipeline built yet, I will happily pay whatever they ask, and it's usually 50% over the grocery store. But
Mhm.
you end up
Okay.
with more food in the pan after you cook it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You end
But
up
like, I
with
mean,
more nutrition
yeah.
in the pan
Yeah. That's
after you
true.
cook it.
Yeah. And if you do that, say it's $4 a pound more, and the average person eats 50 pounds per year, or whatever, you're talking $200. Or yeah, am I right on that? Yeah, that seems like not very much.
It's not.
$200 more in meat cost and in beef cost for
Oh,
a
but I
person.
can't
So if your
afford to
family
eat
of
healthy
four,
because I need a new pair of Jordans or I need the latest iPhone.
my Netflix, that's my Netflix or my monthly, my daily Starbucks and stuff. I mean, it's like the investment cost we're asking the consumer to make is relatively small, but the impact is massive. The potential impact.
It's it would be just a few small investments every day
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that would pay dividends far down the line in human health. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we wouldn't have as many late onset cases of diabetes if we got rid of carbs and seed oils out of our diet.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, maybe we wouldn't have some of these health problems if we weren't eating a lot of this, I'm going to say you're going to disagree with me, and that's fine. But a lot of grain fed cattle that have been fed a lot of GMO grains that have been sprayed with a lot of herbicide and
Mm-hmm.
pesticides.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I'm sure that I will get flamed for saying that there's some kind of herbicide and pesticide residue that makes it in that grain that builds up in that cow.
Mhm.
Like it's there. It might not be a detectable quantity. And just because science says, oh, well, that can't happen, I point to the neonicotinoids.
Mhm.
Like they have proven that neonicotinoids will kill honeybees and wasps in quantities so small we can't even measure them.
Mm. Mhm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you. I mean, we raise grass finished beef. We believe in the benefits of that and stuff too. But you know, yeah, it's interesting. If we could shift more that way, that would be incredible. Joel Salatin has talked about, I've heard people talk about and stuff too, that we have the capacity to raise all of the beef that we raise right now on grass. And maybe we do, maybe we don't. I don't know. There needs to be some for both. And there's always going to be a market for grain finished beef out of, afford they need the cheapness and the other people who just prefer that meat and stuff. But I love the idea of this more local and stuff too. And it's going to cost more. But people always say that they're against that cost. And I really question whether the idea of cheap food is really doing anybody any favors.
Okay, let's pay the extra cost to the rancher that's taking care of his land, that's managing it regeneratively, that keeps his soil covered and has a diverse mix of species in his pastures, that has clean, clear streams running off the ranch and ponds that you can see the bottom of that are full of fish. Okay,
Mhm.
let's not give that guy a premium because that's too much. Let's go to the meat case at Walmart and buy the cheapest fucking thing we can
Yeah.
that's just responsible for all manner of environmental destruction. And guys, please don't think I'm attacking the production beef system, but let's be honest, there's some problems. Like there's some serious problems when you look at the production CAFO model from the 30,000 foot view. You know, are cows to blame for rainforest destruction in Brazil? Not directly, but yeah, they're clearing rainforest to grow corn and soybeans to feed cows in fucking feedlots in Brazil so they can ship them up here.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
is our demand for animal agriculture feeding rainforest destruction in a roundabout way? Yes. But the average cattleman that I'm near or you're near would argue that till they're blue in the face. Cows don't cause climate destruction. We're not cutting, nobody's cutting down the rainforest to grow cows.
Mhm.
And they're right. They're
Yeah.
just cutting it down to grow cow feed because the cows are staying in a CAFO. I mean,
Yeah.
it honestly, that's not much different. You know,
Yeah.
if we're going to cut down a rainforest to do something for cows, let's put cows on it.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. No, it's interesting. It's a conversation we could talk to, like another 2 hours, easy. I mean,
Yeah,
there's so much you could get into with this.
we have been going 2 hours. And something that
Yeah.
I've heard said, and I don't repeat it very often, is, and I wish I could remember who said it, but east of the Mississippi can raise 100% of the cattle that we need in this country. There's enough
Hmm.
grazing land and enough rainfall that we don't even need to be west of the Mississippi with cows.
Interesting. Hmm. Yeah. Well, I'm sure that's true. And I suppose what people say then would be, well, all of that ground would be the grain production ground. And so where would all the stuff that grain production is going to, what would we do with that? But 40, 30, 35% of that or so goes to livestock feed, although that's also including pork and poultry. But another 35, 40% of that goes to ethanol production. I mean, and is that really doing us any favors either and stuff? I mean, yeah,
That's
it's it.
Oh, ethanol is a 2 hour podcast.
Not with me. I don't know enough about that, but on ethanol, I have no idea. I saw on Twitter, and I always get a kick out of it on Twitter, and I don't really care one way or another or something myself. But people who are just 100% against um, solar arrays, and they were saying how this is, what a waste. This is all this productive ground will never be back in corn or something like that. And I was just doing some Google searching, and I have now
Probably doing a better
this was a week or
benefit to the
two.
world with solar panels on it than it was with corn.
Yeah. Well, I was just looking at purely from a car, like how many miles, and I looked how many miles can you get out of an acre of solar electricity harvested versus an acre of corn used for ethanol, and and I don't remember the number. It was ridiculously, wildly more with solar. So you can harvest so many more miles in a car, in an automobile with that. And then they would say, well, what about all the byproducts you can get, feed out of grain? Well, it's like you can graze under solar panels too. So it's still feed. It's also miles and energy. And I was just like, I don't know. I'm very non-confrontational. So, and I'm probably going to get something back from all this and stuff too now. But so I didn't respond on that Twitter, but and maybe the sources I saw were wildly off too. But I mean, if you can, increase more of the fuel, essentially. I mean, why are we raising all this corn to go into fuel? It's a pretty inefficient system in itself. And then we can also use it for agricultural purposes and grazing and actually get paid to graze. A lot of these solar arrays will pay a vegetation management fee to somebody to graze. I mean, this is, and the landowner, hopefully it's, somebody's rural and not some, city person buying up land across the country, but the landowner gets a pretty penny as well for this. I mean, for these rent payments. So it can be a win-win, and that's a lot of money coming into that local community. So I don't know. There's a lot of different ways to do things if people are willing to think a little differently and challenge their own paradigms and be willing to say, not that I need to change tomorrow, but is what I'm doing the best thing that we could do in this situation? I don't know. Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
We're bumping on that 2-hour mark, bud.
Yeah. Well, we'll go another 2 hours on my podcast with you then. So
yeah, definitely. We'll have to do that.
Yeah. I
think I said I might regret saying this, but I'm going to try to have this one out, I think, on the 14th of March.
Okay. Cool.
So if you just heard that on the podcast and it came out on a different day, make sure you send me some hate mail and let me know.
Well, I was going to say, and if I'm no longer on Twitter because somebody, I don't know, somebody heard me in my crop country here go after corn production, I might be in trouble too. So we'll
I've got your phone number now. Don't be afraid to get kicked off Twitter.
Oh, good. Man, no, good. I appreciate it. That was fun. You're good at keeping conversation going too. This 2 hours flew by. Thanks, Brian.
Hey, I'm just faking it till I make it. Where can we find you on social media? How can people get a hold of you? Where can they find your excellent Herd Quitter podcast?
Yeah. So Jared Luhman on Facebook and Instagram, Herd Quitter Podcast, Facebook, Instagram. Yeah, that's where you can find me. I'm not too active on either. I respond to messages, but I don't post too much. So that's where you can find me. Yeah. Thanks.
What's your podcast host platform?
Anchor.
You're on Anchor too? Okay, sweet. Yeah. I'll put the Anchor link to your show.
Yeah. And it's also herdquitterpodcast.com. Yep. Sorry. Should have mentioned that as well. You can find it and listen to it pretty much on any wherever you listen to podcasts, I guess. So
yeah, I'm still learning how to do all that self-promotion. I'm still pretty rough at it too. It's okay. We'll get better.
Yeah, hopefully.
Well, it's been man, it's been an awesome afternoon hanging out with you, Jared. I'm really looking forward to meeting back up with you in a couple weeks and your show and continuing this great conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Me too. I want to, like I said earlier, there's a million questions I got for you that we'll have to do that on mine. So you can be in the hot seat next time. I'm looking forward to it. Awesome.
So how do you sign off on your shows?
Oh man. Pretty much the same. I just say, well, thanks so much.
Yep.
And he says, thanks. Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, thanks so much for sticking around. We'll see you next week.
Yeah. Gosh. Yeah.